For those parents who realize that $600 isn't too much to spend to expand their child's world, RadioShack has the perfect gift. The TRS-80 computer, the most significant investment a parent can make. Programs for your child's education or your business, finance, and home use. Let your children discover tomorrow's technology today. The TRS-80, the biggest name in little computers. Only at RadioShack, a Tandy company.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
We are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.
So, how are you this fine day?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm going to be traveling soon, and so will you be. You'll be possibly going to Retro World Expo?
Yeah, I might be at Retro World Expo for a day. Actually, at the release of this episode, I would have been at Retro World Expo.
Ooh, what do you think you saw?
Video games?
Would there be too many video games?
No, Retro World Expo does not have too many games. It has just the adequate amount.
Just enough games.
Yeah, just a handful, to be honest.
Are you looking forward to seeing anything in particular at Retro World Expo?
Yeah, there's always some cool stuff to see. LGR was there.
Did you see him? Did you convince him to come onto the podcast?
I can neither confirm nor deny that I saw LGR, and can neither confirm nor deny that he will be on the show. Beyond that, it was a good show, or it was a terrible show. I don't know. We'll find out. But you weren't there, so it was sad. It's always sad when you're not there.
Which probably led you to get some more deals and to see some more people.
Yeah, well, it just meant that I wasn't using my cash to buy you things.
That's how it always is, though. All right. So, Zach.
Yes, Seth.
What have you recently been playing?
Seth, recently I've been playing Fallout London because we talked about it in the last episode.
Did we just talk about it?
We did just talk about it. We talked about what it is, but I've actually been playing it.
Wow.
That is my recently played. I've actually put about 5 hours into it so far, which I'll be honest, does not feel like a lot because it is a big game for a mod. And if you didn't listen to our last episode, which we talked about Fallout mods, Fallout London was released in July of 2024, developed by the Fallout London mod team, and it's set in London. It's a mod of Fallout 4, and it's a fun game. I'm really enjoying it. I'm playing as a guy named Alfred Puckersworth, who has a funny mustache. He's got a handlebar mustache and a little beard. And I joined the Vagabonds, which are a gang that talks with like a Cockney accent and wears newsboy hats. It's a fun game. It definitely takes on a life of its own. You know, Fallout London is set in London. It is the first time we really get to see the Fallout world from a place that's not the United States. And with that comes a lot of different changes in how the world is. Just elements of the way people talk. They have different words for things, almost like you're actually in London. One of the things I like is that bottle caps are not the currency in Fallout London. It's tube tickets. They're just called tickets, but they are the like Oyster card plastic tickets that people would use on the tube. Ghouls are called commuters, and there's also a new type of ghoul called the Dryad, which are ghouls that have more nature in appearance. They have like tree limbs sticking out of them. And because there's less of a presence of Robco, all of the terminals and different technologies are primarily labeled with like a British manufacturer. What's fun is, as mentioned in the mods episode, there isn't a Pip-Boy, there's an Attaboy. But what is kind of funny about the Attaboy is I think when I first talked about it, I said it's kind of like the alternative to the Pip-Boy. And when you pick up the Attaboy, it's actually literally next to a Pip-Boy because the company that created the Attaboy was reverse engineering the Pip-Boy to create the Attaboy. So you see the Pip-Boy and the Attaboy are connected to each other and you pick up the Attaboy, not the Pip-Boy. And I just thought that was kind of a nice little visual reference as to why these two devices, which are supposed to be different, are very similar to each other. It's because literally the Attaboy is a ripoff of the Pip-Boy.
An improvement.
No, I honestly think a Pip-Boy is still better. It's strapped to your arm. No. You don't need to like carry it on your waist.
Guess what? And an Attaboy, you don't have to have it strapped to your arm. What if you want to do stuff with that arm? Like stick it into a tight space?
Now, Fallout London is fun. It is also a bit buggy, as it is a mod of Fallout 4, and Fallout 4 is already very buggy. There are some more bugs added to the game. I have encountered 3 what I would consider game-breaking bugs. The first was when you leave the main facility at the beginning of the game, your character wakes up in like a test tube, and you leave it, and you leave the facility your character was from. You get on a tube, like a tube train, and it starts taking you into the city, and you get a little narration being like, the London Tube is here to guide you, and it's like, visit the beautiful city of London, as you're like juxtaposed by like devastation from nuclear war. And then the game is supposed to fade to black and give you the title sequence. When I was first playing it, it never faded to black, and the tube just stopped and nothing happened. And I was like, am I supposed to get off the train? So I like tried to fiddle around and like open doors, and nothing was opening. And then I realized it was supposed to fade to black because I looked up a walkthrough. So I had to reset my save. I got back on the train, and then it worked. The second time I had an issue that was game breaking was I got killed by something, and when I reloaded my save, the game crashed. Just flat out, it did not load. The third time I encountered a game-breaking bug was in a Vagabond storyline, where in the Vagabond story tree, one of the missions that you get sent on is to acquire a part for a Vagabond member's laser gun. You need this part so he can finish his laser gun, so he can help you fix a radio that you were tasked with fixing. So to get the part, you either have to find it or buy it. And I was having trouble finding the part. I looked around a lot of the area that I had explored, and I didn't want to go too far. I didn't want to like stumble into into a more difficult area to try to look for this part. So I thought, well, I'll go to the trader that I met. I couldn't find the trader that I met, who was supposed to be in an area that is marked on your map. It's Nadia's trading post. I would go to Nadia's trading post, and there was no Nadia. So I tried fast traveling around, and I was like, maybe she's just in the area. So I like walked around, didn't find Nadia. So I Googled it. I looked up Fallout London Nadia, and everyone on the Reddit said there is a glitch with Nadia where sometimes she just vanishes. I guess what happens is sometimes she falls through the collision of the ground and just blips out of existence. And I tried a couple different tricks. I tried reloading the AI in the area where you're supposed to find her. That didn't work. I tried to summon her ID. Like I literally typed in it's like something ID and then this like numeric code that's associated with Nadia, and that didn't work. And eventually, in order to get past the place I needed to be, I used a console command to jump ahead in the story trigger. So I literally just jumped one mission ahead of the storyline, and thus I automatically got the part. I automatically did the thing I needed to do, and I just went to the next section. I then closed the game, and I restarted the game, and Nadia was back. And I was like, okay, so I don't know. The game has these weird bugs, and these are bugs that are known. It is a relatively recently released mod, so there are bound to be bugs. They are constantly updating it, and when you do find bugs, there is a bug reporting tool. So just some things to be in mind if you are interested in playing Fallout London. Anyway, Seth, what have you been recently playing?
So recently I've been playing Metropolis 1998, which is being developed by Yesbox Studios, and it's a fresh take on a modern city simulation experience in a retro pixel art style. I think I talked about this game before. You design your buildings, you grow and maintain your city, and you manage real-time traffic and make sure that your citizens get things that they want, like gyms and parks and hospitals and fire stations, and they have jobs and houses. There is traffic simulations that you can have a lot of cars trafficking through your city. It's a 2D isometric game engine, and there is simulations of citizens, and you will watch them go to work, go to sleep, relax, eat, and more. There was a major update that was released back in July of this year, which makes it more of a complete game as they move forward to release. So I always like checking in with this game, Metropolis 1998, to see how they're coming along. Every time I play it, it just feels more and more like older Sims games, or SimCity games. It does have an area where you can like put down zones that people build up. So you can put down zones and you could build your own buildings, or you could just place pre-built buildings. People don't build things by themselves. And the game is a bit more scaled up than SimCity. So like there may be a home with a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom, and it's like the same scale to the car, and you're pretty close up to the cars. The cars are like maybe like a half an inch big, so then the buildings are equally as big type of deal. The people are still tiny, but they're not like SimCity tiny. I feel like Metropolis 1998 is a layer in between SimCity 2000 and The Sims. And that's how it feels to me. It's kind of like a layer there. But yeah, it's cool. I hope they get more roads. Everything's kind of boxy, which they may be the aesthetic that they go for, but I do hope that there can be like on-ramps and stuff like that. Since so far the road design is a little limiting, but it's been pretty fluid in regards to being able to draw things where they go and have people go to the houses that you build, and you don't have to like coax them in and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's Metropolis 1998, hopefully to be released soon.
Metropolis 1998 looks really good. It has a less of a SimCity vibe to me, more of a roller coaster tycoon, transport tycoon vibe.
Yeah, it's kind of like if Will Wright and Chris Sawyer were swapped, and Will Wright made SimCity in Roller Coaster Tycoon. That is kind of like what Metropolis 1998 looks like. It looks like Chris Sawyer's take on SimCity. Which I would play that game. I would play Chris Sawyer's take on SimCity.
Yeah, me too. I love Chris Sawyer's stuff. So
now you're gonna download this game that has nothing to do with him. But anyway, but Metropolis 1998 is available for free for demo, so you can play it out. And I don't believe there's a time on it. I think it's not feature complete since it's not launched.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. I will have to take a look at that. That looks fun. Well, today we are going to be talking about a company. We do this sometimes. We talk about companies. We're specifically talking about a company that we have alluded to and we've never done a history on. In the past, we've talked about computers like the ZX Sinclair and the Commodore 64, but there is one company we've alluded to and we've never quite gone into detail. We've talked about it before. We've talked about it recently. I think the last few episodes we've mentioned them. That company is, of course, Tandy. Now, Tandy was founded in 1919 by Norton Hinckley and Dave L. Tandy. The original company was named the Hinckley Tandy Leather Company, and as their name implies, they were involved in the lucrative business of selling leather soles and shoe repair supplies. That's right, everyone listening to this episode, it's another computer company that started life as a leather company, just like our good old friends over at the Connecticut Leather Company, also known as Coleco.
I just really like that there were two leather companies, one in Connecticut and one in Texas, and they both decided to make video games.
Yeah, they really did.
They're like, we're leather companies, true and true. But also, man, do we love video games.
They're also arguably both companies that if you say their name nowadays to, I want to say to like just a random kid, because no one's going to know what Coleco is, but to like someone from like the 80s, if you said Tandy or Coleco, their first thought would not be leather, but it is what these companies first did. The first Tandy store opened in Beaumont, Texas in 1927. The market would crash in 1929, but Tandy survived, and even more stores would pop up, and they would move their main store from Beaumont to Houston by 1932. When World War II began, Charles Tandy, the son of Dave Tandy, went off to serve in Hawaii. While in Hawaii, he got the idea to expand their business to other leathercraft, considering most of the supplies were the same as the ones that Tandy was already using for their shoe repairs. Charles noticed that men in the forces often turned to leathercraft as an activity. So when he got back home, Charles and his father would sit down and they would decide that they were going to split the Tandy company into two parts. Hinckley would continue his work as selling shoe repair supplies, and Dave and Charles would promote leathercrafts. They started to advertise in a catalog that would mail out to readers of Popular Science magazine if you responded to the ad in the back of the magazine. Soon, they expanded their company to over 150 leathercraft stores. By 1955, the company was growing bigger and was purchased by American Hide and Leather Company of Boston. Now, American Hide and Leather Company of Boston would would change their own name to General American Industries in 1956. Charles would continue to maintain control over Tandy during this time, but there was a bit of a struggle with the direction the company was going. So at one point, Charles put together his money, all that he had, and he was able to purchase 500,000 shares of stock, and using leverage with the board was able to take full management control over from General American Industries. So he had enough sway with the stock where he could go into the board meeting, and he had most of the board members and just said, all right, all control goes to us. And that is what I believe is called a hostile takeover.
Yeah. Now, in 1961, the company became Tandy Corporation and was moved to Fort Worth, Texas. By this time, Tandy operated 125 stores in 105 cities. They would go on to acquire Marabee Art Embroidery and begin to set up Tandy Marts, which were devoted to hobby merchandise. Charles saw that the electronic industry was also doing very well and would go on to purchase the Boston-based RadioShack Corporation in 1963. RadioShack at the time was a mail-order electronic hobbyist company that had been in business since 1921. Now, RadioShack was founded by two brothers, Theodore and Milton Deutschman, and was located at 46 Brattle Street in downtown Boston. The name came from the term used to describe where ships' radio equipment would be stored, in the shack. The Radio Shack. The brothers planned to provide equipment for amateur radio enthusiasts and hobbyists, and also hoped to target ship radio officers, because then they'd be like, I need to buy something for the Radio Shack. Where should I go? There's a store. It's called Radio Shack. Now, Tandy would acquire Radio Shack, and with the acquisition, take on Radio Shack's electronics market. Per Charles Tandy, in an interview in the 1970s, his goal wasn't to target the consumer who would buy an expensive sound system. Rather, he wanted to target people who would buy cheap accessories and modify their existing hardware. In 1977, Tandy began to look at the home computer market. Inspired by the success of Commodore and Apple, Tandy began to pre-assemble microcomputers, with the first being the TRS-80 in 1977. The TRS-80 looks a lot like a terminal from Fallout with a connected keyboard to monitor. I'm pretty sure I've seen them growing up. I think I had a friend who had a few in the basement. The machine was a monochrome monitor with a keyboard. The monitor would be a CRT, so it would be a bulky monitor with a keyboard. Later models even had the keyboard and monitor as part of one housing, as opposed to the keyboard being separate. The system was sold for $599.95 in 1977, which would be equivalent for you going out and buying a computer for $3,220 today, which would get you a pretty mid-tier computer today, which I would say a Tandy at the time was probably like a mid-tier computer for the time as well. And the first version would sell roughly about 100,000 units by 1979. The system featured a Zlog Z80 processor, 4 kilobyte dynamic RAM, and a ROM that had BASIC, and came with a QWERTY keyboard and a 64-character video monitor. In 1980, Tandy would go to put out a smaller TRS-80 color computer named Coco. This unit did not come with a monitor, but had a similar form factor to an Apple computer, being able to be plugged into any television through the use of an RF modulator. The system was a bit more robust, featuring a Motorola 68009E processor and different memory sizes of 4 kilobytes, 16 kilobyte, and 32 kilobytes. The system also came with Microsoft Color Basic. The Coco was cheaper, $399 in 1980 or $1,613 in 2024 money. So it was a very popular option for people who didn't necessarily want the bigger TRS-80 units or wanted a computer but didn't want to spend a lot of money on it because it wasn't really something you could do a lot with.
Yeah.
You're like, I could get this computer where I can type things up and maybe for another $400 print it. Or I could just go to the office. Now, it also featured a cartridge slot for games, a color bitmap display mode, and the ability to do lowercase letters using the appropriate add-on board.
I just want to make that clear. You did need, on early models of the Coco, you did need a separate board in the computer to do lowercase letters.
It was an add-on board, though, right? So it was like a hardware modification to the existing keyboard.
No, to the computer. You had to get essentially like what would be a graphics card.
Yeah, but you could type with your existing keyboard in lowercase.
Yes, in lowercase. Yes.
But you would need a hardware modification in order to do that.
Yes.
Versus today, where everything is software modifications.
Where today, you probably don't even think twice about the fact that you can go into lowercase mode.
The Coco was popular enough to get cloned, with the Dragon 32 and Dragon 64 being two well-known British units that were heavily inspired by the Coco, and to be fair, had cooler names.
They did. And the Dragon 32 and the Dragon 64, while I don't think any of the software was compatible with the Coco, it used a very similar architecture and the graphics were like nearly identical. Now, the Coco was also capable of course, playing games. While the original TRS-80 could do games, the monochrome screen and the lack of true graphics mode meant that the games were mostly text-based, which is fine, but the Coco had proper graphics, so you could play games like Rescue on Fractalus, a space combat simulator that used fractal technology to create mountains. In Rescue on Fractalus, you pilot a ship from a cockpit view, and you have to try to land and save downed pilots. There's also Demon Seed, a fixed shooter where you play as artillery and you shoot birds. There's Frogger, the classic arcade game where you play as a frog attempting to cross the street, and if you don't, you suffer. And possibly the best known Coco game, Dungeons of Daggerath. Dungeons of Daggerath was actually the first real-time, first-person perspective role-playing game. In the game, you explore a dungeon, and you have to fight assorted fantasy enemies. Dungeons of Daggerath might be familiar to anyone who read Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, as it is one of the ways to get the Easter egg keys in the Oasis. So Parzival does have to play through Dungeons of Daggerath in a Oasis recreation of Halliday's childhood home, and he plays through Dungeons of Daggerath to get one of the keys for the Easter egg hunt.
All the models of the TRS-80 would sell roughly 2.4 million units in their lifetime. Tandy's market share at its highest was 60%, which is a pretty significant market share, but it did decline a bit when IBM PC began to take hold of the market. Tandy would adopt an IBM PC compatible architecture for their later computers, such as the Tandy 1000 and the Tandy 2000, which meant that the IBM software could run on a Tandy computer, though it would occasionally have some glitches. In 1986, Tandy had declined from 60% from their all-time high to 25% of the computer market share, which is not as good as 60%. Though, perhaps, the market share may have grown dramatically, which it did, arguably. It did grow dramatically during this time. So they may have only had 25% of the computer market share, but they may have still been bringing in similar, or if not that much, dramatically decreased amount of dollars, because the market share may have been bigger and their old 60% may have been comparable to maybe 40% of the market share.
Yeah.
Year-over-year dollars. But let me tell you, companies generally don't want to make as much money as they did last year.
Right.
They, in fact, want to make more. They were, in fact, tied with Apple during 1986 and just behind IBM.
So what I think it is, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but what I think it would be more like is Tandy and Apple were probably both at 25 because they were tied for control of the market. They were just behind IBM. So IBM probably was in the 30s to the 40s range because IBM was huge. Everyone was trying to tackle IBM. And then the remaining percentage you would have is all the Commodores, the Atari, and all those.
Yep.
Yeah.
And in 1987, they would go on to release the Tandy 1400 LT, which was their laptop, which ran DOS. And the Tandy 1400 LT laptop was definitely more luggable than the Commodore luggable.
Yes. Yeah. The Tandy 1400 you could actually fold.
Ooh. Fancy. We're getting into folding technology. Now, as the 1990s rolled along, so did Tandy's interest as they wanted to capitalize on the CD-ROM console market, and this led to the development and release of the Tandy Memorex Video Information System Unit. Yeah, gonna give Tandy a lesson. Don't name things that. Period. End of story. Way too many words. Nobody knows what that is, and they should have had somebody think about the name before they made it, just as an FYI. But the Tandy Memorex Video Information System was designed to work similarly how Philips CDI, another successful console, or the Commodore CD-TV, also another successful console, that a way they would work, which would ultimately be a CD multimedia device that could also play video games, but not just designed to be just a video game console. And these three systems all had something in common. and that is they weren't really good.
Well, the Tandy Memorex Video Information System, or as I'm going to refer to it going forward as the VIS, was interesting. It ran on Microsoft Windows. In fact, it didn't just run on Microsoft Windows, it ran on Windows 3.1. The intention was it was going to use a special version of Windows 3.1 made specifically for the VIS called Modular Windows. And the idea that Microsoft had was that Modular Windows would be their modular version of Windows that they could put onto other devices. So they had this whole plan where you would have different devices you could plug into your TV, and these would have modular windows on them. And, they would have cross-platform ability, and you could probably bring some of your Windows games over to these modular Windows systems. This plan didn't work out because the VIS would be the only device ever released with modular Windows in mind. The system itself, the VIS, ran on an Intel 286, so it was literally just basically a 286 computer, had a Yamaha sound system and a Cirrus Logic video system. The system itself physically looks like a CD player that you might see on someone's stereo set-top. In fact, I looked up a photo of it, and it is the most boring looking video game console of all time. It is a gray box with a button to open the CD player and a button to turn it on, and like a little information dial to tell you what time it is. There were 20 games available for the VIS, and 48 multimedia discs were also sold for it. Some of the games included Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective Volumes 1 and Volumes 2, Lynx The Challenge of Gold, which sounds like a Zelda game, but is in fact a golf game, The Manhole, new and enhanced, The Secret of Hosea Freeman, and The Adventures of Victor Vector and Yando, Adventure Number 1, The Vampire Coffin. A lot of these games, like The Adventures of Victor Vector and Yando, Adventure Number 1, The Vampire's Coffin, and Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective Volume 1 and Volume 2, were interactive adventure games. So they would sometimes feature FMV, they would sometimes have full voice acting, they would oftentimes involve moving a cursor around on a screen and clicking buttons and getting things to work. Some of the multimedia discs that were released included America's National Parks, Bible Lands Bible Stories, Atlas of the U.S. Presidents, and Fitness Partner.
Those all sound like great games.
Some of the other games just sounds like things that we would have in our childhood, like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective Volume 2. Not Volume 1.
No, we would only have Volume 2. The VIS would go on and retail for $699 in 1992, which is approximately $1,592.06 in 2024. And nobody bought it. Apparently, RadioShack employees would go on to call it virtually impossible to sell, and only 11,000 units would be sold in 2 years while it was on the market. With games like the Atlas of the U.S. Presidents and Bible Lands, I'm surprised they didn't fly off the shelves. Also for the low price of $1,500 to play Atlas of the Presidents, which arguably could probably be played with a paper map.
Did you know Jefferson was from Monticello?
And that's the game. Buying one today, however, may set you back a few $100s. It's one of those situations where nobody bought them, so nothing was made, so thus they're not available. So there was one that's on eBay that we saw that you could buy for about $700, which is $700 in 2024 money, which is also arguably half of what it was selling for back in 1992. In terms of any legacy, Tandy and RadioShack would drop out of the computer market in the 1990s, largely due to the desktop PC market being far more competitive with companies like Dell and CompUSA. RadioShack would continue to sell computers with a focus on the IBM Aptiva line and compact computers. Tandy would go the other direction, and they would go defunct in 2000. RadioShack itself would also later face major financial decline and join Tandy in bankruptcy 15 years later. Now, General Wireless Operations would gain ownership of the 1,743 RadioShack locations and would begin to use the stores to sell Sprint, Boost Mobile, and Virgin Mobile wireless phones. So if you ever wanted to know why there was all these wireless stores everywhere, it's because they were RadioShacks. Though only for a little while, because General Wireless Operations would go bankrupt 2 years after RadioShack, and the 400 remaining stores would go on to get purchased by Retail E-Commerce Ventures, who also purchased Pier 1 Imports, Liddens and Things, and the Franklin Mint, all of which I believe have gone bankrupt.
E-commerce Ventures just purchases bankrupt companies.
And they still operate them out of their reformed measures. So the retail e-commerce ventures is just where retail brands go to die.
Yeah.
Retail e-commerce ventures would use the RadioShack brand for a cryptocurrency platform called RadioShack DFI. And in 2022, the RadioShack Twitter began to tweet not safe for work content to garner attention for the cryptocurrency platform. Also, they sold merch, I think.
Yeah.
And you could buy RadioShack merch. And I think they sold like pins and all sorts of fun merchandise that you could buy. I think you could still buy, if you want a RadioShack hat or something like that, you could still buy that today. And that's about it.
Yeah, that is. Crazy to think that just a small company founded in Boston, still kind of around today, tweeting NSFW content on Twitter.
And when they only really wanted to sell radio stuff to ships.
They did want to fill the Radio Shack, and Tandy wanted to fill leather.
That's right.
Well, we're going to get into our retro rewind. So, Seth, do you want to go first?
Sure. Zach had me play Wizard of Oz for the SNES, which was released in 1993 for the North American market and 1994 for the European market. It was developed by Manley and Associates, which kind of sounds like a law firm, and it was published by the SETA Corporation, SETA Corporation. You play as Dorothy, and eventually as Scarecrow, Tin Man, or the Cowardly Lion. You proceed through the world trying to get to Oz. There are hidden areas along the way, mazes and puzzles, to try and bring the slippers to the wizard. It's a side-scrolling platform that blends together action, adventure, and puzzles, though the action portion is kind of stiff and slow, especially for Dorothy, and the puzzle that I played was pretty good. You had to play as Toto, and you were up in the heavens, I guess, and you had to find the word and the word puzzle of the message, and the message was, you are not in Kansas anymore, and you have to step on all the worded tablets. Now, it's interesting. When you walk with Dorothy, she kind of moves slow. She jumps, she can kick, she has a little wand that she can charge up, and then she can toss items at people. They're like these little golden, I think they're golden bricks from the Yellow Brick Road. Well, you also have to find yellow bricks because you have to build the Yellow Brick Road at the end.
Can you imagine what a better movie would be if when Dorothy encountered the witch, she just smacked her with a brick from the Yellow Brick Road?
The game opens up. You know how in the movie the witch, at least Glinda, travels via a bubble? Yeah, so the game opens up. You are a normal animated person who's then tossed into this game world where you are an 8-bit sprite or a 16-bit sprite. You're like a 16-bit sprite. And then Glinda comes to talk to you, and she is just a massive head in a bubble. She's not a witch in a bubble. She's just a head in a bubble. And then the evil witch comes, and she is also an evil witch in a bubble. And it's just weird. I was really confused. And then you explore, and you go into Munchkin's houses, and in every Munchkin house, there is the same chair that's trying to kill you, and it looks like the big comfy couch, and it's just storming at you, and you throw stuff at it, and I think you get damaged randomly. So if I was feeling like I was getting damaged just from jumping into the ceiling of the Munchkins houses. It was just odd. Bananas and lemon things were falling on me, and they'd fall slowly, and it was just really odd. Now, the game came out in the 90s. It received moderately praised reviews. However, as the years go on, people tend to separate the license that they've looked at fondly away from the game and look back at it with eyes that are less tainted by marketing. And the publication Gambit reviewed was probably my favorite review. Their review of The Wizard of Oz was, "What we have here is a terrible idea for a game based on a movie that predates video games, incorporating stuff for an animated series that nobody watched." So if you are now listening to this and go, Wizard of Oz had an animated show? Yeah, it did. And it had a video game, and you probably didn't realize that either. So do I think that the Wizard of Oz holds up on the SNES? I think in the core of it, I think there are good bones to the game. I think there's a little bit of an identity crisis when it comes to what it's trying to accomplish with it, but I also think that there's better games out there to play versus it. So maybe not. Next week, Zach, you can play Excalibur, and that's with an X and a K, 2097 for the SNES.
I will. Well, Seth had me play Catacombs 3D. Developed by id Software and published by Softdisk, Catacombs 3D was released in 1991 for MS-DOS. The game is the third title in the Catacombs series, with the first being Catacomb, released in 1990 for Apple II and MS-DOS. The first and second game are third-person shooters, with the third being its first step into 3D. It is doing that thing that a lot of games did in the 90s, where when it was the third game, they put it in 3D, and they said it was 3D. Now, the game was developed by id Software, which consisted of John Carmack, John Romero, Jason Blotchwick, Tom Hall, Adrian Carmack, and Robert Prince. It's a very interesting game, and despite the primitive nature of it, it's kind of fun. You can definitely see where the engine would go on to inspire Wolfenstein 3D. I will say that the game is not as smooth as Wolfenstein 3D, and the graphics are just quite not there yet. They're a little too bright for it to be, I don't know, like Wolfenstein 3D I think has the perfect balance of graphics where they're not too colorful, they're kind of just the right shading, and Catacombs 3D, because of how early it was released for MS-DOS, is still kind of suffering from the fact that it had to rely on like CGA graphics and EGA and stuff like that. So it wasn't quite at the level of being where Wolfenstein 3D was able to do a bit more. So things are kind of flat, but it's still okay. It's a fun time. You play as a guy going through a catacomb and you shoot fireballs out of your hands. Pretty good stuff. If you like old first-person shooters, I say give it a shot. Just be aware that it is old. I mean, it is older than Wolfenstein 3D, so it is a very considerably old first-person shooter. If you're not a big fan of Wolfenstein 3D, or if you think Wolfenstein 3D is too old for you, don't play Catacombs 3D. You'll probably not like it. Does it hold up? For some, yes. For others, probably not. For me, though, yeah, I liked it. I think it holds up. Next week, Seth, you can play Conan, The Mysteries of Time for NES.
Exciting. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in and listening. This has been another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. You can follow us on social media. You can follow us on Twitch, Facebook, or Instagram. Those are all at Classic Gaming Brothers. You can also follow us on Twitter or Blue Sky at CG Brothers Pod. And you could head over onto our website, and on that website, you can contact us through the contact form. You can send us an email at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. And finally, you can always just find us on your favorite listening app, be that Stitcher, Amazon Podcasts, or Google Podcasts, all three defunct podcast players, which we were on and then they are off. But truthfully, we are also on all the other podcast players that are still active, like iTunes and YouTube. We do have a new YouTube channel. We only created it because Google Podcasts went away. But so when you get a moment, if you want, you can head on over and subscribe to that YouTube channel because that's fun. And anyway, thanks for listening. Hopefully you had a great time. Zach, am I missing anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Zach.
And I've been Seth.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.